the research and media program lead at Africa No Filter, a leading organization that focuses on narrative change and narrative shifting, especially around harmful and stereotypical narratives within and about the continent. And at Africa No Filter, we believe that when we invest our time, money, and voice into the community of narrative change makers, with time, we will see that the conversations and thoughts and impact around Africa begin to change and reflect a more dynamic and evolving continent. With me today are three amazing panelists. I would like to quickly and briefly introduce them because they will get an opportunity to talk about their work and their reflections around building communities. But first and foremost, I'd like to introduce Nigel Mugamu. I hope I've said your name correctly. And what I found interesting about Nigel is that he was an accountant in a former life. Nigel, I'm a recovering lawyer, so we have something in common in that regard. And right now, he's a journalist by profession. And in 2012, he established 263 Chat, which is a Zimbabwean online publication focused on encouraging and participating in progressive national dialogue. And together with a team of fellow journalists, they publish the news every day on www.263chat.com. Nigel, if you could post the link to 236 Chat on the chat box, that would be great. Welcome, and of course, you'll get an opportunity to talk more about your work and your perceptions. My second panelist, who I'm excited to speak about today, is Candice Fortman. And Candice is the executive director of Outlier Media, a Detroit-based service journalism organization. And before that, Candice was in the marketing and was a marketing and engagement manager for WDET. So Candice has broad experience and knowledge when it comes to media engagement and service-based journalism. We're going to hear more from Candice as we go along. Welcome, Candice, and thank you so much for joining us. Last but definitely not least is Polly Irungu, who is a Kenyan multimedia journalist and the founder of Black Women Photographers, an 800+ global community and directory. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to let us get quickly into it in the order that I introduced you. Nigel, I'm keen to hear your thoughts around building community. What does that mean to you and in the work that you're doing? How has that helped you? But most importantly, how has that helped you build resilience, build community during this period around COVID? Over to you, kind sir.
Well, thank you very much. I would have thought that I would have gone last, but it's okay. Look, so, 263 Chat, I started 263 Chat in 2012, as you mentioned, and it wasn't an online publication. I didn't have a business plan. I didn't think, I'll be doing this as a full-time job with my team of journalists and stuff like that. All I was really trying to do was build a community around Zimbabwe. And I used to live in the diaspora, and I'm obviously based here now. So I always like to say I appreciate both sides of the coin, you know what I mean? I jokingly say I'm a mixed race kid. I understand both the white side and the black side, And the idea behind 260 was really just to create dialogue. I just felt as a country we weren't really having enough dialogue on Zimbabwe, and I felt that international media was really focusing on three people, opposition leader Mugabe and his wife, and I just thought there's more to Zimbabwe than that. And so, all I know really is community. 260 Chat is a community-based publication, and we're trying as hard as possible to, involve the community in our reporting. So, this topic is right up my alley in terms of what we're trying to do, and obviously we're trying to do it in different ways. So, yes, we publish our news on our website, but for the last 4 years now, we've also published an e-paper, we call it electronic paper, or it's essentially a PDF that has the news of the day published on the day of the news, and it's sent via a WhatsApp only, and it's sent out to just under 51,000 subscribers for free every day. So that's one way where we've looked and said, how do we how do we tell the story? How do we involve the community that we serve, and where do we find them? And just now we're just about to get involved. Well, we're just about to launch a new product around SMS, because we've also then realized that, well, not that we've just realized, but we've always known that not everyone is online. There are a lot of people who are offline, and so we don't want to have that digital divide that's already there to widen. So let's try and tap into that. So that's, those are just my opening remarks around the work that we do. We obviously like to tell a story using as many visual. We make a lot of short videos. We take a lot of pictures. We're very heavy users of social media. So we've got Twitter account, Facebook, Instagram, and we try to tell stories differently depending on I'm a visual creature. So if you tell me you saw a great sunset, I want to see the great sunset. I want to see a picture or a video. And so we try to accommodate our communities, we like to call them, by using and leveraging the different tools that are out there.
Sorry, I was speaking on mute. Thank you so much, Nigel. Before we move on to Candice, I have a very quick question. As you were speaking about Zimbabwe, have you found that building community has changed the way other Africans have begun to speak, or Zimbabweans themselves have begun to think and speak about Zimbabwe?
Yes.
Okay.
Short answer is yes, yeah, definitely.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Candice, over to you and welcome. What time is it there? Thank you. I'm assuming it's very early.
It's 6:53 in the morning.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for making time. We appreciate it. Candice, I'm quite keen to hear about the work you've been doing, but most importantly, the role you've played in building communities and the impact that has had.
Sure. So one, I'm so grateful to be with you all this morning. It's early, but this is a good reason to get up. This is one of my favorite conversations to have. So thank you. So I'm here in Detroit, Michigan. And for folks who don't know where Detroit is, it's on the other side of the lake from Chicago. And so I grew up in a neighborhood with a mother that was a community organizer. So I feel like I've been spending my whole life doing the job I'm doing right now to some degree. I remember when we got our first computer, I won't tell you what year it is, so I don't tell you how old I am. But when we got our first computer, my mother asked me to go make a flyer to tell our neighborhood that the trash pickup day was changing. And I think about that now, and I realized my mother was my first assignment editor. She was like, hey, there's information that our community needs, and we need to figure out how to share it. And now I spend my whole life figuring out how do we share high quality information with Detroiters. So I work now for Outlier Media. Outlier is a startup service journalism organization here in Detroit. We run, to Nigel's great credit for what he started, we run an SMS-based service for the exact reasons he discussed, because before the pandemic, the number we were looking at was something like 40% of Detroit households did not have access to Wi-Fi in their home, which meant that in order for them to get good information about how to save their home from tax foreclosure or how to access food pantries, they couldn't go to the internet to do that, which is where most journalism was happening. And so we run an SMS service that Detroiters can use 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to look up automated reported information. And that service is available in English, Spanish, and Arabic, which are the three languages spoken most in Detroit. And then we also we build the beats of reporting that are in that SMS service by doing something we call an information needs assessment. So we asked Detroiters, if you had a reporter working with you for the next 24 hours, what would you have them go research for you? We're really trying to get at the idea of, in order for this person to feel safe and secure in Detroit, what would they need to know? So we look at that information that people send in to us, but then we also look at public record information. So if a city has a 211 service, for instance, which is like an information service that some cities here in the States have, We look at non-emergency 911 calls. So people calling the police, but not for emergency situations, which happens quite often. When people can't find food or shelter, they go to the place they feel, might have an answer. So once we look at all that public record information, we see what Detroiters are asking the most questions about. And that is where we form our beats of reporting from, specifically in that SMS service. So where, in the beginning of my life, my mother was my assignment editor at Outlier. Detroiters are our assignment editors. They tell us what we need to go find out for them. So we do that information needs assessment every 6 months, which means that we have a newsroom that is ever changing. If we do that assessment and we realize that all of a sudden in 6 months ago, Detroiters' number one information need was around transportation, and 6 months later, it's around education. Then now we're all education reporters, and we need to look at where that information gap is for Detroiters around education. So, and then of course we also do long form and investigative work, and that often happens when we can't find an answer to a question that comes through the SMS service. So if we as reporters and journalists go out and try to find information and we can't come up with it, that means there is an accountability gap happening. Or if we start to see the same question come through the chat a lot, there is something that needs to be raised to the top. People are trying to sound an alarm about something. And we just did a piece with NBC National about a woman who had been paying for a home for a couple of years. And the deal she had worked out with the people is that it was basically rent to own. So she would rent the house for so long, and eventually those payments, they would turn a deed over at the end of those 2 years. The 2 years happens, she's made all her payments on time, she's done all this work inside the house, and all of a sudden the guys disappear. They don't exist anymore. Well, what we come to find is that this is a scam happening to Detroiters all across the city. People are taking houses that they do not own and finding fake deeds and selling them to people. And these houses belong to someone else, someone that lives in California somewhere, who has no idea that anyone is even in the house. So and we found that story through the SMS service because someone reached out to us and said they needed help. So it's also how we do our sourcing. So in a lot of ways, we're building community through that SMS service. And then finally, we run the Detroit Documentaries program. Documenters is a program that was founded by City Bureau in Chicago, and we run it here in Detroit. It trains residents, so citizens, to go to public meetings, so city council meetings, water board meetings, education board meetings, and take notes at those meetings that are then edited by journalists in our partner newsrooms. Those residents are paid $16 an hour to go to those meetings, and they become a part of the journalism ecosystem. Because we're losing journalists, because we don't have the same capacity in our newsrooms, there is no city hall reporter in all of Detroit. So there's no one who's just reporting on the mayor's office or just on city council. And so those residents are really helping us to be able to fully cover city government as a whole. And that is an incredible community of practice. They do all sorts of trainings together, and they have become their own small community inside of our journalism newsroom.
Candice, I'm blown away by several things. One, and which we'll get to, is just the building of trust, because for citizens to engage the way they've engaged, it means that you've built trust within the community, but you've also given them an opportunity for their voice to be heard. I'm going to come back I have several questions for you. The work you're doing is amazing, and I really appreciate the feedback that you've given us. May I please request that you post some links to the work that you've done on the chat box, so our audience can have an opportunity to go through the same and ask any questions that they may have. I'm blown away, guys. Polly, let's quickly move on to you, although not quickly, take your time as you tell us more about the work that you do and how that has contributed to building community and the importance of that.
Yeah, I mean, where do we even begin? It's so hard to follow you two, but I will hopefully meet the same level of just incredible work that you all have been doing. So thank you for having us. When I think about community, I think for me, just one, my background, I'm Kenyan. My mom is the oldest of 12, and I've always grown up with the mentality that it takes a village, that we can't do it alone, that we need community. And quickly, when I was just thinking about ahead of this, conversation that we were having today, I pulled up the definition of community, because we always hear that, and sometimes it feels like a buzzword, like diversity and inclusion, right? But what does it actually mean, and what does it actually look like in real form? And so with just a simple Google search, this is a definition, one of the definitions that comes up with community: a feeling of fellowship with others as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, and goals. And when I think about the work I'm doing with Black women photographers, I'm bringing together all these folks, Black women specifically from all across the world, who have that common shared interest, who have those common shared goals, who want fellowship with each other. And when I think about just sometimes, just the impact this work has had, I'll just share like one of the testimonials from one of the members in the community. Her name is Tesseret Youssef. She's based in Lagos, Nigeria. And prior to joining Black women photographers, she had expressed to me that at one point she wanted to just stop photography altogether. She was just feeling demoralized. And of course, a global pandemic does not help that as well. And so this is what she had to share with me. And I'll drop a link to this in the chat where you can see other just quotes and the impact that BWP has had on members. She said, "I found a family within this community of great women whom I look up to and call my friends. The constant sharing of jobs and grants opportunities, classes, and portfolio reviews gave me the confidence to believe in my work, to connect with top photo editors, and apply for opportunities which landed me a few of my grants. Through this community, I found belief in myself and my art." And for me, hearing that surpasses anything that I can hope for by doing this work, to be able to give someone that confidence again, to believe in themselves, to see that they actually belong in this industry, that they can be a photographer, that they can be an artist, to keep going, because obviously the work that we're doing, there's most of the times the work is, with these are predominantly white, right? With the Western gaze. And so for me, being able to, help instill that, help play that small role in a person's life is just, beyond what I set out to do. And here's another one from Johanna. She's a Haitian American photographer. She said, "Black Women Photographers is one of the organizations I recently joined during the pandemic. And it has shown me the beauty in having a community versus competition. This organization has opened doors for me and provided education in my industry to help me build and improve my craft. I want to shine some light on Polly, the founder. Thank you for creating a platform that we didn't know we needed." And so for me, that is another, again, a quote that I, of course, was not expecting, but really just moved me, because sometimes it's so hard to see that work you're doing matters when you're in the thick of things. You all know how day to day, there's just so much work, a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that people do not see. For us to foster and for us to really actually nurture and build this community, building community is day by day action, right? We do it every single day, every moment. And that is how, we are able to do impactful work in Detroit or elsewhere. And, for me, I guess I've always just wanted that. And so for me with BWP, I'm building what I wish I had. And fortunately enough, it's, been making a difference in other people's lives. So.
Polly, the work you're doing is amazing. I'm obsessed with your website. I'm obsessed with the fact that you've curated and brought together amazing Black female photographers. That cannot be gainsaid. Your work is amazing. It's timely. It's needed. And please, I would like to request, if you have any questions, that you include them in the chat box and we'll respond to them as soon as we can. But guys, I would like to very quickly delve into some questions that I have for you around community building and the impact of the same. And especially for me as a grantor who oftentimes assumes I know what my community needs and develops call-outs that are tailor-made to my needs, yet I'm not meeting the needs of those who actually need the grants. What feedback, especially to grant makers, let me be a bit selfish first. would you have when it comes to building community? And I really love what Candice talked about when she said that they ensure that there's a deep dive research. They spend time having conversations with residents of Detroit because their voices matter, and you're amplifying the voices of the residents and citizens of Detroit. I'm quite keen to know what are some of the mistakes you found that grant makers make when they're working on or on curating or working with communities, because I'm sure at some point you have all been grantees in one way or another. Let me begin with Nigel, although you had said you didn't want to begin. So I'm going to sort of turn the spotlight to Candice, give you a minute to calibrate. Don't worry, I'm going to be kind to you, Nigel. Candice, I'm quite keen to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So Outlier is almost 90% grant funded. So I work with foundations a lot. And I think that one of the things that I find to be true, at least in the United States with grant makers, and I talk about this publicly, so I'm not scared to say this here, is that I think that there has been an emphasis for too long on rewarding people who have just been around for a long time, which quite often means here rewarding white men, which removes people who are deeply connected to communities quite often from the running, especially from large organizational changing grants. So you might give a person of color, $50,000 to play around with, but multi-year support that's millions of dollars, that often doesn't come for the kinds of organizations that are doing the work that you're talking about here, Natasha. And I think the other thing that I find to be true is that there is a lack of research that is happening on the foundation level. So like really good scientific research, we're actually going to be working with the foundation in the new year on an information needs assessment in their community. So a community foundation reached out to us and said, we want to do an information needs assessment, and they're going to tailor how they give their money out based around that information needs assessment, right? So if they find that in their community, people are having issues with food, then they need to be funding food banks. Or if people are having an issue with education, then you probably not only need to be funding organizations that support, children in their education, but you also need to be funding education reporters, because you need accountability along with the grant funding. It is not enough to give it to a bunch of social service organizations that aren't going to be watched over and watchdogged by the press. So you really do have to have that shared strategy in order to make those grant funds really stretch and count the way they should.
I mean, thank you. Especially, Candice, I agree with you wholly around research and funding. And oftentimes funders tend to give money to people who have already received multi-million funds. So what we tend to do is isolate those who actually need help in community building and resource mobilization. So that's something I think I'm quite keen to hear. Thank you so much for that. Nigel, any thoughts on some of the mistakes we make when we're either giving grants or working around that space?
So for us, we're a hybrid. So we've been a commercial entity for many years now, actually. And so this year is the first year that we've actually done a lot of, and I say a lot, we've actually applied for some grant funding. We haven't received all of the stuff we've applied for, but we've also recently been awarded some grant funding. You're right. I mean, it seems like the usual from someone like me sitting outside, it seems like the usual people will get the grants. But for me, because I'm an ex-accountant, so I'm always looking at numbers. I'm always thinking about, hang on, how do we, like I always say to people, I always talk to my team about this. Let's not, like in fact, I've been banging on about this lately. Don't treat grant funding like grant funding, you know what I mean? Treat it like it's your own money, right? You don't have to go to that conference in Canada, right? There's a Zoom, you can sit in front of Zoom, in front of a Zoom call like this, and you can still gain the same kind of knowledge. Yes, you won't have the interactions that you normally have, during lunch or after dinner or whatever, but, you'll still, look, I've been sitting for 2 days actually tuned into this conference, right? And I've learned a lot. I've got my notebook here and I've been making a lot of notes. And I've been sharing, you guys tune into this. So I think one of the mistakes that I think grantors make is maybe, or grantees, maybe let me speak about it from that perspective. Let's not assume that we're going to get the same funding next year. So if you're going to get it, then well done, then really make it count, make it count. And I always believe in my dad. My dad is such a important influence over my career, my life. One of the things that he always said to me was, come to me with, if you need $1,000, come to me and say, all right, Dad, I need some help, but I've got $200, right? So one of the grants we applied for, they said, well, you gotta do 30% of what you're proposing to do. And so it makes you think, oh, hang on, we've got to generate this. The business has to generate this. And then also, tied to kind of like our DNA. So we applied for this grant. What does it mean to the 260 chat community? How do they benefit from this? Right now we're in a pandemic, as we all know, and it's affecting all of us in different ways. And so one of the things that we've applied for is, around health reporting, because we recognize that a lot of our community members are really worried, not just about, COVID. They're now worried about a host of things, malaria, because remember, I don't know if you guys remember, because it seems like we've been in this COVID thing for a lot longer than it actually has been. People were now confusing malaria symptoms with COVID symptoms. I remember we wrote a story about how there were now more malaria cases in a particular part of Zimbabwe. So we're like, hang on, let's dig deeper here and really travel to these places and get more information so that we can inform and educate our community. So yeah, I think there's so many ways of looking at it. And I think both the grantees and the grantor need to sort of switch shoes a little bit and say, let's see things from their perspective. And I think they're just closer working relationships, and not, I like, there's an organization that's granted us some funding, and they're not just giving us the money and leaving. They're actually saying, okay, do you guys need some business coaching, right? Do you need someone to just look at your website and say, does it make sense for what you're trying to do? They're asking us all kinds of, can we have your organizational chart so we can see if you're structured properly? And for us, we're like, oh, they actually care about us. So stuff like that, I think, is also useful, and it's non-financial, right? But that stuff, to me right now as a business owner, is actually worth more than the grant that we've applied for. So those are just my few comments around that issue.
Thank you. I'm just going to pivot slightly now towards, especially to you, Polly and Candice, because you work with communities who are often considered invisible, or, for lack of a better word, who don't matter. And especially, Polly, you work with Black women and Black female photographers. And oftentimes, the person who's most neglected, even within the continent, is African women. How has building this community strengthened the skills of these Black female photographers? How has it opened doors, but also built the confidence of the photographers? I have found in the work that we do that, apart from giving money, like Nigel said, building the confidence of our creative community actually amplifies their voices more. So I'm quite keen, especially for you and Candice, to delve deep into that. But first, let's begin with you, Polly. What has the importance of amplifying these voices been, and what has the impact been for you personally and in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, thank you. Great questions. I think for me, the impact, for example, well, actually, let me just say that a lot of the times, people say, they're undiscovered or hidden figures, but it's really just a matter of to who. These photographers have been doing great work long before I helped amplify them and their work. They had been photographing for years before people started to pay attention and to care. I've been speaking about issues like this, about equity and inclusion in these spaces for some time. Before now, all of a sudden, people have given me a mic or whatever, a platform, and are starting to actually listen to what I've been saying for some time. So, all of the work they've been doing, I'm just happy to help amplify it. A lot of the times, just given the industry we're in, it's, as Candice mentioned, it's very white, very male dominated. And if people have always followed status quo, then that's what you're going to get, right? If people always award the same grants to the same, white male photographers, that's who will always get that visibility, that platform. And so that's why I'm so, fortunate to have able to celebrate the first anniversary of Black women photographers with a 40,000 grant fund. Where I'll be giving, 40,000 in grants to Black women photographers to help fuel their creative projects, just to help them, finish or complete it or whatever it's at in its journey. It's just to help them, get closer to that goal. Just because, again, when you were applying to these things, or when we're, in the sea of whiteness, to be frank, it's so easy to be overlooked. It's so easy to fall through the cracks in this industry, especially if no one's checking for you, if no one even cares to look for you outside of, Black History Month or outside of some tragedy. And then, it's so easy to fall through those cracks. And for me, knowing as someone who has tried to fit into other spaces, but have had no luck or just did not feel the support that I, needed, I felt like I was slipping through some cracks. And as someone who, who has some visibility, more visibility than these other photographers, if I'm feeling that way, imagine how they were feeling, right? And so for me, I just try my best to amplify them and their work, the work that they've been doing for so long, and give them the resources that they may not have been able to access, whether it's grant fees, waivers, whether it's actual grants, whether it's equipment, whether it is workshops and portfolio reviews with some of the best in the industry, anything that can help them get to their next goal, whatever that looks like for them, is what I try to do and support through the Black Women Photographers platform. And that looks different for everyone. Some folks will receive some grants by the end of this year from Black women photographers. Others have received brand new equipment. Others have attended some of the mini sessions on grant writing, on pitching, on finding your creative voice, on tackling imposter syndrome, and so on. Others have just found a community with each other and found others who look like them, who are doing the work, who they can get inspired by and turn to as a resource for questions or mentorship or whatever. And so there's so many ways that this work has been impactful for them, but also just for myself. We're all been experiencing this pandemic, and that hasn't been easy. And I've been experiencing just like professional career changes as well on top of doing this work. And so for me, I also turn to them as a source of inspiration, as a way to keep going, as a way to, see the work that I'm doing matters, and seeing how, day by day, this will have long-term impact and will be continuing, far after I'm gone. And so for that reason, it's just like, again, it's a lot of work, but I'm thankful for that, because I'm seeing the difference, every time when someone posts a photo, a simple act of posting, seeing that they're actually creating work to be posted, or seeing that they're celebrating someone else's work, or seeing that, they've actually made that step to apply for a grant, because that is not easy. Or seeing that, again, they've been hired through the directory. Anytime I'm seeing those moments, that also helps fuel me to continue the work I'm doing, and brings me, just a sense of joy that it's so hard to put into words, because again, a lot of this is not, a lot of this has been unexpected, right? And so seeing it, make a difference and so quickly to so many across the world has just been, again, a really beautiful feeling.
Thank you so much, Polly. And I must say I'm so proud of the work that you're doing. And there's something that you talked about, and I'd really love for Candice to pick up on that. Just how we're overlooked, and especially because Candice is African American, and oftentimes Black voices are turned to during Black History Month, and then we often forget them. I think as African women, we experience that because everyone wants to speak about African women when it's the Day of the African Woman or the Day of the African Child. Then after that, we no longer exist. And we're going to get to you next year. Don't worry. We'll come again next year. What has your experience been in amplifying Black voices, but most importantly, ensuring that they're not forgotten when it comes to storytelling?
Yeah. So I think a couple things I need to say as like a foundational point. So let's talk about Detroit as a city. Detroit is a city made up of where the makeup is 80% African American. And that's 780,000 people as a city. And 80% of them are African American. 90% of them are people of color. So Detroit is an incredibly colorful city, is what I'm trying to get at. And this is the city that raised me. This is where I'm from.
Yeah.
And it has an incredible history inside of what is Black history in this country. And so I've always been of the mind that Blackness matters all the time, right? It's not subjugated to February, Black History Month, or any other time, right? I lived in a city where all of my leaders were Black. It never occurred to me that I couldn't become mayor if I wanted to become mayor. It never even crossed my mind because that's what I was seeing in front of me. And so, a child cannot imagine what it can't see, right? We need to be able to see ourselves in these positions. We need to be able to see our ability to attain and keep power. We need to be able to see ourselves as community builders, because of course we are community builders. We are the definition of community building. And so in Detroit and in my work in Detroit, no matter where I was always trying to ensure that Black folks were on the mic when I was working in radio, were, now at Outlier, are behind the pen or behind the keyboard. But I will tell you that can be difficult. And a lot of that is about the industry. So we work in an industry that is incredibly hostile to Black voices, and especially Black women, which means that we are losing talent. My managing editor is an incredible Black woman, right? Who had left the industry altogether and was working on her PhD and had decided she didn't want to work in newsrooms. We had to go recruit her out of a PhD program and bring her back into the industry because there was no way we were going to lead a newsroom in Detroit without a Black woman in leadership on the editorial side of our business. It was incredibly important to us. But when we were recruiting for that position, we didn't have a single Black woman apply. That's not by mistake. Many of them have moved away from Detroit, right, to get opportunities because the main newsrooms here wouldn't hire them or wouldn't move them up the ladder. And then I think the other thing is that many of them have just left the industry. So right now, my job is to ensure that I'm building a newsroom that is attractive to everyone, but in particular, attractive to Black talent. So, yeah.
I love that. And before I let you go and move on to the next person, Candice, I'd like to pick up on two things that you've said, that, there's an absence of Black talent, but it's intentional. And this may be because there's a lot of disgruntlement, which has led to most of them being disengaged. Mm-hmm. So my question, and it's probably a difficult one, how can we re-engage Black talent through building community? What are some of the things we need to do to build trust again and to remind Black talent that their work matters and their voices matter? What are some of the things, the key things we need to do to ensure that we're bringing these voices back into the community and not just bringing them back to tick a box, but bringing them back to ensure that their voices matter and that they contribute to the larger conversations? Yeah.
And that they get equal platform access, right?
Exactly. And also equal pay, because oftentimes we want Black talent to work for free.
So start there, Natasha. Pay people their worth. right?
Thank
Overpay
you.
them if you can. What is it hurting you?
Exactly.
So for Outlier, for the organization I'm building, we did a market study. So we did a market study of what the salaries look like in newsrooms across our city. And we are a small newsroom. So we're not going to be the first newsroom that people are like, I want to go work there, which means that we need to have a much more attractive employment package. And that for me worked out perfectly because I'm mostly trying to hire people who look like the folks in this city. So that means that I get to pay them well, which for me, pay equity is not just about running a good organization at Outlier. It also means that when that person gets ready to negotiate in their next newsroom, they're able to negotiate at the rate of our white colleagues who were going to make that money in other newsrooms. I'm trying to make sure that as an ecosystem fix, this isn't just about running Outlier well, it's about making sure that Black and brown journalists are able to move from our newsroom to a higher pay rate in the next newsroom. So that's one of the things. You really need to look at it, not just about the work that you do, but how can you make this an ecosystem approach? But I think the other solution or other part of that, I just lost my train of thought. Sorry. So I'll just leave it at that. I'll leave it at that for now.
But I think we were talking about how to build trust again.
Oh, I'm
sorry. Re-engage the community.
So I think, are we talking about the community or report or journalist?
Journalists.
Okay. So I think, so one, it's about how we pay them, but it's also about how we, especially on the reporter side, interact with their work. So if we continue to assign Black reporters to editors that are hostile, to editors who do not understand the communities those people are reporting for. So if I'm a Black journalist working in a newsroom and I'm a part of my community and I'm getting stories from my community, but then I take it up to my editor who is not a part of the community, who goes into the newsroom and then leaves the newsroom and drives to their suburban household and has no real connection to the city or place. So when I pitch them a story, they're like, that's not a thing. That doesn't matter. Well, how would they know if it matters? They're not even a part of the community. So that's one of the things, right? We also have to trust them to be able to move into leadership and to be able to move into leadership in a way that is actually helpful for the Black folks that are going to come behind them. Not that they have to sort of become a part of the problem, which happens a lot, but that they can actually be radical in how they manage, and especially how they manage people of color. And then I would say lastly, is that the idea of objectivity, right, is problematic in a lot of ways, right? Because of course we all come in with all sorts of belief systems that were built in us long before we ever got to this work. And so it's ridiculous to think that somehow, because I'm a Black woman, I am more likely, not to be ethical or thoughtful about how I do my journalism, which I think too often, especially Black journalists, are judged incredibly harshly when they try to write about race, when they try to write about religion or politics. And so we have to start trusting Black folks to write for Black people without having to translate for the white gaze. We have to be able to trust Black people to be professionals and to understand their communities because they are a part of those communities. And I think you might get at perhaps recovering some of the damage that has been done in this industry. And that would just be like touching the very hem of the problem.
Thank you so much, Candice. Quite a few things to pick there. Of course, first, pay. Two, giving them room and space to actually create and tell stories through their gaze and lens. Salam, we're going to come to you. If you could type your question, that would be great. Yeah, we're going to come to you shortly. Salam. But Nigel, I just want to pick up on that, especially because of the context of Zimbabwe and the stories we get to be told about the African continent. We joke at Africa No Filter that Africa is often considered 5 countries: Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Ghana, and the rest don't matter. So even when we're telling stories about Zimbabwe, it's about a botched election or something gone wrong. So I'm quite curious, what are the key things in community building that have worked for 263 Chat? And how can we ensure that these things and skills that you have implemented in your work in Zimbabwe can be translated in to other African countries or implemented in other African countries? Over to you, Nigel. I think you're on mute, Nigel. Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Now you can hear, okay. So
Yeah.
I was just saying, sorry about that. Good series of questions you just asked there. So, community building is not it's not an event, it's a journey, you know what I mean? It doesn't happen like, today or yesterday. It's like, if I look at like what Polly's doing, like, you didn't just set up this website and, start doing this. I mean, there were conversations that took place, with Candice. People need to know this SMS platform. So there was something, someone had to, they had to market it and say, look, this is what it is. If you want this kind of information, text crisis or whatever the word is to this number and you'll start receiving, updates. So it's a journey. And so for us, from the very beginning, we were literally a discussion platform on Twitter that evolved and became an online publication. And we evolved because, when I say we, it was just me back in the day, right? It was, we were thinking, if we have these discussions, Zimbabweans both there and here, and then others are just watching or participating, mainstream media will then pick up on this and then they will report about our conversations. That was what I was thinking in a very naive way. And I thought, let's use Twitter because, it was 140 characters back then. You could be anonymous. You could share your thoughts on, I don't know, whatever, gay rights or whatever it is you were discussing at the time. And it was a Tuesday discussion, 6 p.m. local time. And I realized that there was a community that really resonated with what we were doing. Even the topics were being discussed, were being decided by the community. So I personally don't know how news media are doing it without the community. I don't know how to, I don't know. It's like, how do you, because you can't. Like what Candice was saying, there's an SMS discussion or whatever, and then the community then say, hey, can you please dig deeper into this issue, right? It has to work that way. So, there was a time the local telcos, I think it was 2014, 2013, they decided to give free Twitter. So Twitter, if you had the Twitter app on your phone, you could discuss and talk without that eating into your data. So they did that for 6 months, right? And it was a way of just trying to get people on there because obviously our discussions were basically when we started, the notion was if you encourage dialogue, you will get arrested because the Mugabe regime was not into allowing people to have dialogue, or not, progressive in that way, right? And so we ignited daily discussions on social media, and we haven't been arrested, and I haven't been arrested. You know what I mean? So it became cool and fashionable, and to talk, and communities started to build on Facebook and Instagram, on WhatsApp, and so. Come fast forward to the telcos give free Twitter. We then built WhatsApp communities around specific topics like jobs, and so anyone who's looking for a job can join this 263 Chat jobs group, right? And I didn't know at the time we're building evangelists. So you're looking for a job at Africa, wherever you're looking for a job. And all we've done is buy the newspaper, take a photo of the job advert, place it in the job, you get a job. In your mind, 263 Chat helps you get that job, right? For us, it was like a normal, I don't know, we didn't think, this is, we're building we just thought, hang on, we can afford to buy the newspaper. These guys have got the data and they're in a group. And now we've got communities around farming, mining, jobs, like I mentioned, discussion groups. In fact, when the pandemic started, someone then said, can you please create a well-being group? right, to talk about mental health issues. And so we did, right? And we've got that group, and every day they talk about different things, and people talk about depression, and where can I get resources to help me or help my mom or help whoever is in my community. And so it's literally, we're still reporting the news so every day on our website, in the e-paper, doing it on social media. But there's an undercurrent of, okay, how do we stay close to them? And throughout this, I haven't called them audience, right? They are our audience, but we like to use the word community. And if I see people in town or out and about, they may know who I am, and I say hi. I don't know. They might be in the group, right? And it also helps, because we've got a young team. I'm 43. My team I'm the oldest in the team, and everyone else is in their 20s. And one of my team members had a baby the other day. First time father. Got married last year. That kind of thing. So young people, you let them, let them come up with all these ideas. You get them involved in the process. And you just remember, this is, I don't say community organization. It's still a business, right? But the community is at the heart of what we do and how we report. And it's just something that, I don't know, it's what we do every day.
Thank you so much, Nigel. Before I come to you, Polly, Salam, are you online? I'd love to give Salam at least an opportunity to ask her question. I thought it's easier to ask than to read it. Salam, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi, everyone.
Hi, can you speak a bit louder?
Can you hear me now?
You sound a bit distant, but please continue.
Yeah. I don't know if you can hear me. I'm not sure. I had the same problem with the panel yesterday. I've just written the question, so maybe you can just read it so that everybody can hear it properly.
Yeah. No, you can go ahead and ask it.
Okay, if you can hear me, I can just read it. So I wanted to ask, especially for Polly and Candice, and how do you get around managing differences across communities or differences within these communities? For instance, for Polly, I believe the Black women photographers is a very big community with so many intersections of everyone's identity and background and all that. And I imagine the same is true for Candice, working across larger communities, especially within the context of the US identity politics. So I believe you probably encounter so many differences that may not always be easy to manage or mediate. And I'm curious to know your experiences in that. And I've been reading a lot about community and movement building. These are very common challenges that often come up. But there's, of course, no one-size-fits-all approach for everyone. So if any, I want to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you. I've written the question there, but I hope you managed to.
Thank you so much for your question. I think that's such a great question and something that I think about often. I'm sure Candice does as well. But like you said, our community is, yes, we have these common threads of similarities, but we're not a monolith. Black people are not a monolith. And so for me, I can only know my experience because that's what I lived through. I can't know what they lived through. I can't even understand what being a Black woman photographer is like in Paris or in Belgium or in London or Lagos or wherever, because I didn't live there. And so for me, I just listen. I just listen deeply, and I just take time to again, take a step back and just hear from them, what are their experiences like? What they need, how can I support them, how can this platform support them, because there's just, like you said, there's so many intersections, and when you have nearly 1,000 people in 40 plus different countries like myself, and it's just sometimes I can't even comprehend that, but again, I just take time to listen, and I just take time to ask questions, and then I implement based off of what they have said and their feedback. So before I even started Black women photographers, like you were mentioning, Nigel, there's so many conversations that I had with photographers prior to even deciding to launch this. And one of the conversations I've been having before even the pandemic was just a lot of them had difficulties getting hired. A lot of had difficulties getting paid work. And that was across the thread for everyone. And so one of the things I did after listening to them was start a COVID-19 Relief Fund. And so that launched in June 2020. And I was able to crowdsource funds through Twitter and was able to raise over 14,000 and helped 70 Black women photographers from around the world with immediate financial relief, just because I listened, and just because then after listening, I did something to act on that. And so that's just basically what I do, is anything I can do to help, I listen, and then I can see how can I actually act on what they've been saying, just for that way, these conversations that we've been having endlessly, they don't just stay as conversations. What next? What can you do next to help support, even if it's such a diverse community? And so I often send so many Google form surveys, like they're probably annoyed, like, Polly, how many more surveys are you gonna send me? But it's just because I need to know where you're at. I need to do a temperature check. I need to learn from you all, what it's like, being a Black woman photographer in X country. How can, what resources looks like for you, because that's different for what it looks like for me. And so even just recently, as I've been planning, 2022 events, which is so crazy to say out loud. I almost said 2021, but as I've been planning next year's events, I've been, I asked that question: what do you want to learn? Who do you want to hear from? Because I can't do this work based off of what I want. It's not about me. And so that's why, again, I just ask these questions, I listen, and then I try to implement. So I hope that helps answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Polly. Yeah, that was good. Taking notes.
Candice, do you also want to chime in?
Yeah, I'll briefly say, especially the part about identity politics and how they're how they act in the United States. So in Detroit, it can be interesting because it's a little bit different than much of the country, because it is there is one it's mostly African Americans, right? And not that there is not diversity in identity politics between African Americans, because clearly there are. But I think that it plays out differently here. It plays out very differently here. And so one of the things that we really have to work on is sort of like rumor mill patrolling. So when something is boiling up at the community level that is simply untrue, right? That can eventually become harmful. So like conversations, for instance, around the vaccine, that, are deeply rooted in people's fears around very real things that have happened to African Americans in this country, right? Including the Tuskegee experiment, right? And having to really ensure that people understand, one, what actually happened during the Tuskegee experiment, right? So like doing some history correction, but also helping people to understand the difference between this and the moment that we're living in right now. And that can be difficult. And that can be difficult even if people trust your newsroom, because it's not about whether they trust us, it's do they trust the government? Is do they trust institutions much larger than us? And I think the data shows us that in the United States, trust for institutions is at an all-time low. And so we really are working against people's biggest fears, that the folks at the very top are dangerous to their safety. And that's a difficult place to navigate.
Thank you, Candice. And Candice, not to sort of target you, but I have a follow-up question, especially around building inclusive communities, because oftentimes we can find that we end up being gatekeepers and locking out those whose voices matter or whose voices are often excluded. And what can we do to be intentional about ensuring that we're building diverse and inclusive communities, and not using the word diversity to tick a box? You know what I mean? What are the things we can do?
Oh boy, diversity to check a box. I could write a story. So, so I think I'll just talk about what we are doing. How about that?
Absolutely.
So we have two things that I'm really proud of that have been good programs in this place. So one is that we have started a collaborative editorial meeting that any freelancer or journalist working in the city can attend once a month. Right now, they're all virtual. We tried to do one in person, and then the numbers went back up. So now we're back virtual. but it allows for newsrooms across the city to think about projects they could be working on collaboratively, that because with all of our limited resources. It allows us to bring in our freelance network. So we have a freelance network at Outlier. And that freelance network includes journalists, reporters, photographers, videographers, graphics folks, data folks, developers, all sorts of people, right? And they are always invited to this collaborative editorial meeting so that they can pitch any newsroom in the city. This means that they're in front of our two major daily newspapers, they're in front of the TV folks, they're in front of ethnic media, they're in front of the two public radio stations, the public media station. And that was something that's how we use our power. So our ability to be able to corral these folks into one room, we're using it by disseminating that power back down to our freelance network, because we don't need any more work. But our freelancers absolutely need work. And they were not able to connect with these editors. These editors were not calling them back. And so our introduction to this community through these editors means that these folks are working all the time, because we don't always have work for them, right?
Yeah.
But they're working in newsrooms across the Metro Detroit area. And it's one of the things I am most proud of, because it also means that we're creating this loyalty with these freelancers, and we can pretty much, right? And so we have this really beautiful community and this great feedback and this great loop of giving.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. And I'm hoping we're all taking notes, so we may steal with pride some of the ideas and stuff that Candice is doing, because she's doing amazing work. Nigel, I'd love to come to you, and especially giving the continental context where oftentimes women and marginalized communities are left out of community building and storytelling, and then we remember them once in a while. How are you ensuring that at 263 you're building inclusive communities in the work that you're doing? How are you ensuring that you're amplifying the voices that are often invisible and forgotten?
Yeah, no, it's a very tough one. Actually, that's a very tough thing that we do, and we have to do this. So when we started, we were, look, like I said, I'm not a trained journalist, right? So the media sector, when 260 was starting up, didn't take us seriously, right? So we had to deal with that issue already without even, from the jump. And so because of that, we were often overlooked, and so that made us, introspect and go, hang on a minute, if we're being overlooked, who else is being overlooked in the stories, right? So you start to notice things like, obviously I'm wearing my number cruncher hat, and I'm like, hang on, 52% of the population are women, right? So when a health story is written, that usually affects a woman first, education, stuff like that. So hang on, who are the sources in the stories here? And so we had, even in our editorial, we had to change, and train, guys, and say, look, hang on, look, when you write this kind of story and there isn't a woman in the story is incomplete. So the editor, and I'm not the editor, editors on that sort of, tip, we tried a few years ago, we're looking for a, so this is what we've done internally, right? And then I will tell you what we're doing externally. So we had to, sort of look at ourselves as an organization and go, hang on, would love to have, Thomas is our editor. I would love to have at least a female deputy editor. And so we tried, we just didn't get any. And we're still struggling with that, right? And so, but from the editorial side, what it really involves is being able to go out. So 67% of the population live in the rural areas. So right there, the majority of women are, well, the majority in our country is, and about 65% of the population are under the age of 35. So really who we're trying to target is a rural woman under the age of 35. That's really what we're trying to get to. And so when we made the decision to to, use SMS, for example. We looked at some basic things like maybe in a rural household, the husband may have the smartphone and the wife will have like a feature phone, right? So how do we reach her? Without saying, hey, can I borrow your phone? I.e. speaking to her husband. So we had to really think about the way we do things. In some cases, for example, you want to, talk about, trying to be inclusive. You go into a community with a camera. You're holding your Canon 300, whatever it's called. Right there, that's going to intimidate certain folks. You know what I mean? So we've worked out, mobile journalism. How do you go into a community with your cell phone, get them on your side and say, hey, listen, we are, they might be around, there might be a well, while they're, they're all getting water. So, how do we get both the guys and the girls from our team to go and do this story? You have to be very strategic about how we do this. We talk about facts before, I've heard them in the, in the newsroom talking about, okay, we're going into this particular community. This particular community is, the party is the party, the party that is in control of this area is this particular party. How do we go into this area? So basically being sensitive to what's going on, not coming at it from this sort of high, hey, we're journalists, we know what we're doing, but really trying to be inclusive, be sensitive. Sometimes our community in our WhatsApp groups, we go into our WhatsApp groups, hey guys, do you know anyone in this community? Are you from this community? Can we work together because we want to get this kind of story? Right now we've got this idea, for example, of how do we get the community to help us with the story and say, well, this story will cost us $300 to produce. We've got $100, we're short $200. Can we get you guys to chime in? Can we get you guys to help us with the source? Because we feel like if it was a community story, right, people will take ownership of that story and they'll share it on social media. Someone will say, my mom lives in that community. You can go and stay with her. You can go visit her. She'll give you a meal. She'll take you to my aunt who's, that kind of thing. So we're trying to experiment with different ways of including the community, at different ways. How do we get them financially to get involved? How do we get them to be the sources of the story? How do we, there's a lot. There's a lot involved, but it's something that needs to be done.
Thank you so much, Nigel, for those clear and succinct points. Guys, we are coming to time, and I would like to, are there any questions that the audience may have for our panelists? Because I want to, before we get into any closing remarks, I have one final question. We talk about the amazing benefits and impact of community building, but there are very many challenges. And I'd love to hear about the dark side of community building. What are the struggles you faced, Polly? Let's begin with you. Building a community of Black female photographers. Let's get into that.
Man, we need a whole session on that alone, but I think the thing is, when you're constantly pouring into the community, you need to be able to have something or someone to pour back into you. And that is just like the hardest thing I faced so far is like, my own cup needs to be filled. And I can't help fill other people's cups when my cup is empty. And so when I need to take a step back, when I need to, set some boundaries, when I need to close my laptop, or when I just feel my body saying, you're tired, and like, no, you didn't finish everything on your to-do list, but that's okay. Just rest. That is when I need to actually do and implement more of. And that's just, again, daily habits and something I'm constantly always working on. But I think that's the hardest part. There's a lot of work that we've all been doing that people do not see. And so people, sometimes forget to give us grace, right? Forget to, realize that we are also human, that we also have personal lives, that we also need time, that we we can't be constant machine and constantly available to you because, you know, you need support now. You know, I have a full-time job, I'm doing this, and I have my own aspirations within my work. And so I have to remember that, okay, you know, I can't help everyone every single moment of the day if I can't even help myself. And so I just have to always, you know, stop and try to, you know, again, rest and just do things outside of just my day-to-day work of community building. That is just for me. That is just my own, whatever random thing that I enjoy, and just like pause and actually rest and etc. So I think that hopefully good enough answer, but yeah, that's I think the hardest challenge I face right now.
It's a perfect answer. Thank you, Polly. Candice, over to you.
Everything Polly said times 1,000, all of it. You know, at some point during the pandemic, I think it was like June of 2020. I can't remember time anymore. I don't know how time works anymore, but I got a therapist for the first time in my life because I knew I needed extra support. I could not keep going without someone professional to help me really dive into all sorts of things. So one, I encourage people, find somebody to talk to. You do not have to be all things to all people. You can't be.
Yeah.
But I think I'll say that community building is undervalued by the ecosystem at large, which means it's also underfunded. So the kind of work that all of us have talked about doing here is not the kind of work that folks are giving that multi-year $1 million support to, although it is often lifted up as incredibly important, especially in times of turmoil. So if you look at what the conversation was in journalism in June of 2020, right after George Floyd was murdered, when you look at the promises made by major newsrooms in this country, it was all about diversity and giving community voice and ensuring that we were covering communities fairly and equally and you know, and building trust and all of this stuff. But none of those things are funded at the level at which people talk about it being important. And so we often then are doing this labor intensive journalism on our own backs at sacrifices to our own financial security because we know that it is that important. But I argue, and I will argue till I'm blue in the face, that is not enough. Not everybody is willing to do this because it's it feels good. A lot of people are not willing to do it just because it feels good, because folks have kids to feed and mortgages to pay and all of those things. So eventually the industry is going to have to decide that they're going to fully invest in communities, which means fully investing in people who actually have the voice and the ear of the community on their side.
I feel like we should just close the session now.
Just like, wow, mic drop. Like, welcome to Candice's TED Talk.
Candice, do you have a podcast and tune in every day? Nigel, do you have any thoughts on the same?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that Zim went under like a hard lockdown when this whole thing blew up like last March, right? And the married guys in my team then would send me messages, say, boss, I know you wanted us to work from home. I can't. I need to leave the house, right? I can't do it. I know you're sending data and all this sort of stuff. I need to be in the office. And then the government changed the rules anyway and said, journalists are part of the essential services, so we could go back to work. But one of the struggles with sort of working from home is sort of clocking off and going, okay, you know what, my day's done, and I think there's a lot of that where we are not necessarily taking care of ourselves. So 9 p.m. we're still working because we've been working since 6 o'clock. We've been working in our PJs. We've done deals in our PJs. We've submitted that grant application in our PJs and whatnot. And I think I worry about the mental health of the team in general. It's also difficult to report about the number of people. I mean, right now we're in the middle of the beginning of a fourth wave, and I know that's also taxing on people because all of a sudden those COVID numbers have jumped up. We're We're seeing more people dying. We're seeing more people, you know what I mean? And that even if it's not someone you know, that's going to have some impact on your mental state. You know what I mean? So it's I think we'll have to also remember, and I think we also have to remember, and this has also come across really clear for me, that we're also human, and we need to be compassionate. We need to be, you know, about the next person. And I've seen a lot of that throughout this. And I just, you know, it's one of those things where I post COVID, I want to continue to see that. And I want us to continue to see, for us to see each other as people, you know, not just Black people, but, you know, people of color or, you know, whatever, just as people. You know, I want us to recognize that, you know, humanity, remember that we are, you know, human. Yeah, so I think it's important to lean on each other, you know, check in with people, you know, I check in, you know, hey, I haven't seen you in a while, what's going on? Are you okay? Sometimes just that simple act of just, hey, are you okay? You know, lets the other person know that you just, you know, yeah. I mean, I got a message from a friend of mine and just said, I'm just checking in with you. Are you all right? And, you know, I still need to respond to that message because he sent it to me yesterday, and I just need to say, hey, I'm fine. I'm busy, but, you know, I'm fine. Yeah, and I think we just need to remember that, look, we're going through something really, really, you know, interesting, tough. The world is out. We don't know what the end of 2022 is going to look like, really, right? But our work is important. The community that we serve is important. And if we can lean on each other, you know, that'll be great. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I see that there are no more questions, but we are coming to the end of this session. And I just want to thank my panelists for an amazing conversation. But before we wrap up, I hate the term closing remarks, but I just want to hear some, just a few things you have to say about the impact and importance of community building. You know, just short, succinct, to the point. I'm going to begin with you, Nigel, then Candice, then Polly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a wordy kind of guy, but just to.
Indeed you are.
Yeah, you know, just chatty is how I've been described. You know, whatever it is we're trying to do, whatever it is we're doing in our work, let's just also remember the community that we actually serve. You know, this could be, I mean, you could be a fireman or something, and, you know, this still applies to, you know, to you as a person, but let's just always remember the community that we serve, always put the community in, let's always think about how they receive what we're trying to do, the outputs, how we can always improve, how we could always help. And then also, you know, we also need to do things that also protect our peace. You know, Polly mentioned this, you know, yeah, we also have struggles. I'm also depleted and empty and tired, and, you know, let's also try and protect our peace. And it's okay to, you know, not be available tomorrow because we just need a timeout. It's okay. It's cool. You know, just regroup, yeah, and keep it moving.
Thank you, Nigel. Candice?
Sure. So the future of journalism, whatever that future is going to look like, is going to require something radically different than what we are existing in right now. Our world is changing, and it will continue to change. And so I think about something Adrian Brown says, and I'm going to read it because I'll forget it if I don't. Our radical imagination is a tool for decolonization, for reclaiming our right to shape our lived reality. Our communities are requiring that, right? Like, they no longer want to exist with news systems that don't serve them, the journalism organizations that don't see them. And now, because of the way that we pay for journalism, if you are not aligned with your community, you're also going to be broke. So I always say community is as much a good thing to do as it is a part of your bottom line. If you actually intend to be a profitable newsroom, then you need to be a newsroom that is based and living for your community.
I love that. It is a good thing to do, but it's also good for the bottom line. Polly, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, everything that they said, but also, I think for me, you know, anyone who's listening, I just want you all to realize that, you know, just start with what you have. If you feel like there's a gap that needs to be filled, go out and fill it, that you can make a difference, even with just whatever platform, whatever, thing that you think is holding you back, just go out and do it. Because for me, I never thought, little me, from Nairobi, who grew up in Kansas, could do all this work, right? It doesn't matter where you started. And so, if you feel compelled to do something to make a difference, see how you can do that. And I always think about the quote that I feel like all of us have heard at one point or another, but it says, if you want to go fast, go along. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that really sums up what we're all doing. We can't do it alone. It does take a village. We need to turn to each other. We need to have spaces like this that are for us, by us, that we're able to have these conversations. So thank you all for just, even cultivating this space, because it is so important. And it's just even more inspiring that it's, for us, by us, and that you all have been supporting us for long before it became cool. And so thank you so much, for hosting us, and Natasha, for your such a great questions. This really just fueled me up, and it's a great way to start my morning, my day. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And Polly, it's also just hit me that it's pretty early where you are. So I just want to say a personal thank you to you and Candice.
No, I mean, thank you guys for bracing with me before I had my coffee. So
I think there's some take-homes from this conversation that are important to me here. And one is that because community building is undervalued, it's underfunded. So those are some of the things we need to look into. And two is look into the community that you're serving. And that was from Nigel. Ensure that you're actually getting information and it's data-driven. And three, also take a minute to stop and refill your tank before you move forward and engage everyone else. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Natasha Kimani, Africa No Filter. It has been my absolute pleasure and honor to have moderated this session. Your panelists have been Nigel Mugamu in Zimbabwe, Candice Fortman in Detroit, and Polly Irungu in New York. Thank you very much. Have a lovely evening. It's evening in